Peach and Love Records.
Heart to the goal. Harrison's walk with the venerable Maharishi Mahesh Yogi began on August 24th, 1967, when the Beatles went to hear the Guru speak at the Hilton Hotel in London. Afterward, the Maharishi invited them to a 10-day conference in Bangor, North Wales, starting the next day. George, especially, was genuinely excited about the prospect of hooking up with someone who it seemed might be able to finally provide some clarity in his often complicated, stressful life. On August 27th, the Beatles were formally initiated into the Maharishi Society, but some distressing news suddenly came through from London. Their manager, Brian Epstein, was dead from an overdose of bromide, a prescription sleeping pill. Although the Beatles were naturally concerned about how Epstein's untimely demise might affect their careers and thus their staggering collective fortunes, for George Harrison the tragedy only encouraged his further retreat into the yogic philosophy that by now consumed him. It was with great enthusiasm and optimism all around, therefore, that George, John, their wives, and a few close friends arrived at New Delhi Airport on the morning of February 16th, 1968, to begin serious study with the Maharishi at his extravagant Rishikesh mountain-top retreat. At the end of a rugged 150-mile drive to the ashram, the celebrated disciples were warmly welcomed by the diminutive guru with a shower of encouraging words and endless cups of steaming almond tea on the veranda of his comfortable bungalow situated in the heart of the rambling camp. A couple of days later, Ringo, Paul, and their entourage of lovers and friends arrived along with a throng of representatives from the world's press to a tumultuous welcome from the entire camp. As one day slipped casually into the next and the initial excitement of the trip subsided, the boys' pent-up tensions slowly began to unravel under the magic spell of the Maharishi's Transcendental Meditation, or TM. Soon, however, the inevitable happened, and the Beatles' fascination with meditation slowly began to subside. After all, sitting hour after hour silently muttering a Sanskrit syllable to oneself, no matter how exotic the locale, did tend to get a little boring. Ringo and his wife, Maureen, left after only 10 days. Paul and his girlfriend, actress Jane Asher, managed to stick it out for some 6 weeks before jetting home. That left just John and George, the Maharishi's most ardent believers. So besotted were they with the bearded holy man that even when a rumor circulated that the Maharishi had made a very definite bid for the earthly affections of Rishikesh meditator actress Mia Farrow, they were loath to believe it. Within a week, Farrow had gone on a tiger hunt in the south. It was suggested by the Maharishi's staff that she would be returning shortly thereafter. She never did. Within a few days, John and George became reluctantly convinced of the Guru's alleged impropriety and stormed out of their bungalows and phoned for a taxi from the ashram's dining hall. Like the initial allure of global Beatlemania, the disappointing reality of soft drugs, and the broken promise of the hippie culture the Beatles had toyed with and eventually rejected, transcendental meditation, the Maharishi, and all the mystical hoopla that went with it was now just another bad trip. One in a series of numberless disappointments that had come hand in hand with the unparalleled fame, fortune, and entree that came with being a Beatle. Although George Harrison still deeply believed in the concepts of yoga and meditation, the Rishikesh roller coaster he rode with the giggly guru could clearly not deliver him to the lofty spiritual destination he so desperately sought. Next up are several vintage snippets of conversation with the Maharishi recorded during his all-too-brief heyday as the Beatles' spiritual master.
I preach a simple system of transcendental meditation which gives the people the insight into life, and they begin to enjoy all peace and happiness. And because this has been the message of all the saints in the past, they call me saint.
You seem also to have caught the imagination of the pop stars in this country.
What is this pop star?
People who sing with guitars. Have you anything to say about that?
I find that. You mean the Beatles?
Yes.
Following the Beatles' acrimonious departure from Rishikesh, Lennon, McCartney, and Starr never really had too much to do with the bearded guru again. Harrison, however, maintained an affectionate, if long-distance, relationship with the pop prophet. I had occasion to speak with the Maharishi at length on Christmas Eve of 1992, at which time I questioned him about his feelings on Mr. Harrison's overall contribution to the expanding field of what they now call New Age spirituality. I was surprised by both his candor and keen sense of humor.
Do you have special affection for George Harrison? He's meant a lot to a lot of people for many years now. How do you see Mr. Harrison?
I see him as a successful musician in his own talents, whatever the effect, but he has become popular. And I attribute this to his talent also, and to the British press intelligence. The British press is very intelligent to promote their values, their national values. You know?
But Mr. Harrison has been very intelligent because he's used rock and roll music and popular music to promote the tenets and philosophy of transcendental meditations and spirituality. Surely you must applaud him for that, for properly using the medium of music to help to enlighten the world.
I was happy when he started to meditate. I knew he would make a big impression in the world since he started to meditate. That's how the talents grow with this program. And all the world of science then, and the world of artists, and all the different values. But it has taken, the whole society has taken a good turn in this knowledge. It's very good.
Following 1968, George made pilgrimages to holy Indian sites, financed the Hare Krishna's opulent Bhaktivedanta manor outside London, and collaborated with various Indian artists on a variety of musical projects, including his Dark Horse Record Company's release of the LPs Shankar Family and Friends and Ravi Shankar's Music Festival from India. Among the many gurus George Harrison sat before over the years, his most profound relationship was with A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, better known as the Hare Krishna movement. Harrison commented on his feelings concerning Krishna consciousness at a 1998 press conference.
First, I bought a record of the Hare Krishna mantra, and I was familiar with it from my trips to India. It's not exactly a new thing. It was in the West, say from 10, 15 years ago, but it's an ancient thing. You know, it's the Vedic culture of India. And so I met A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, who was the spiritual master a few years after he came to the West. And he was a great old man. He was wonderful. And I sort of was friendly with him, and I knew a few of the guys, and they were all trying to get temples here and there, and I got them a temple in London once, and I appreciate it, but I'm not as closely associated as people think. Like, for instance, I wasn't here receiving sanctified food last night, as it says in the Daily Herald. I like them, but in some ways the Krishnas are like groupies, for me, because they think, oh, well, George is into it, so they all come. And one of the things that the master taught was that the first problem in the world is that we all encroach upon each other. And so what do? They do it to me too. Out of love, maybe, but nevertheless, it's still a limit to how many people or Krishnas you can meet in one day or one lifetime. But the philosophy is great, and I wish them all the best. Well, I keep it to myself unless somebody asks me about it, but I still feel the same as I felt back in the 60s. Well, I lost touch with the Krishnas when the Prabhupada, the Swami died. About, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago. So I don't really know. I know one or two of them, but I don't really hang out with them. I used to go and see the old master, the A.C. Bhaktivedanta, quite a lot. He was real good. But Yeah, I'm still involved, but it's something which is more like a thing that you do inside yourself. You don't actually do it in the road, you know? It's a way of just trying to get in touch with yourself. But yeah, I still write songs with it in there, you know, bits and pieces, but I got lots of songs unfinished that say various things, but maybe I say them in different ways now.
Back in 1968, he struck out on a solo career, composing and performing the Indian-influenced soundtrack for the film Wonderwall. A year later, George pioneered an electronic music album, becoming one of the earliest artists to use the Moog synthesizer. The project, entitled simply Electronic Sound, released on the short-lived throwaway Zapple label, became an early precursor of what we now know as New Age music. When the Beatles finally imploded in April of 1970, the pop world went into a deep mourning from which, in many ways, it has never fully recovered. I spoke to the group's longtime personal assistant and Apple Fix-It man Alistair Taylor about the seemingly inevitable breakup of the group.
They were breaking up from about day one. I mean, more than once in the very, very, very early days. I mean, I had to go and find George because he just said, I'm not doing this, and he pissed off. You know, so there was nothing new. But, I mean, I think that the pressures got so bad toward the end. I am just astonished they stayed together as long as they did.
As fabulous as it might have been to those looking in from the outside, Harrison's role in the Beatles was a very drawn-out, painful apprenticeship of largely missed opportunity. George commented on just that fact in a 1984 press conference.
The Beatle producer George Martin said recently how he always felt sorry that because he concentrated more on them, and he should have paid more attention to me. And he said to me personally, I hope you'll forgive me. But, you know, I think I'm quite happy with my role in the Beatles. You know, it split up because of all those problems, because there was too many songs and because we got, you know, too close to each other. But I'm quite happy with the way things went. But I feel that whatever I am, I always have been that. You know, maybe different things have taken longer to, you know, reach the surface or whatever. But, you know, I am what I am, and I'm not really that much different to how I was then. Maybe I'm more able to express it, or maybe people are more interested now in what I had to say, because in the 60s and early 70s, they thought I was a loony, because I just, you know, went to India and did all that bit.
The 70s was a heady time for George, ushering in a new beginning and proving there was indeed life after the Beatles. In 1970, with the official breakup of the Fabs, Harrison immediately released his impressive 3-record set, All Things Must Pass, which shot to #1 and spawned the classics My Sweet Lord and What Is Life. The best-selling collection spent some 38 weeks on the charts and proved that Harrison could cast a giant shadow as an artist in his own right. That same year, he and Patty settled into their celebrated Oxfordshire estate, Friar Park in Henley-on-Thames, the brooding, walnut-lined, 120-room Victorian manor built in 1889 by eccentric millionaire attorney Sir Frank Crisp. Harrison also threw himself into Apple Records, the ill-fated Beatles' umbrella venture, producing such stellar artists as Billy Preston, Badfinger, and Ravi Shankar. In a milestone event which showcased Harrison's now well-known humanitarianism, he organized rock's first all-star benefit, 1971's The Concert for Bangladesh, to aid victims of that war-torn country. As successful as the concerts were, the deluxe box set and full-color booklet later released eventually earned millions of dollars for the worthy cause. Next up is a rare press conference held just prior to the now historic event.
All I'd heard, you know, I mean, up until the time we decided to do the concert, there'd been very little that I'd actually read about it. I'd read little pieces here and there. I'd heard a little bit on television in England. No, it's the same. I mean, it just happens to be East Pakistan now, as far as I can see. it happens to be that which we're doing the benefit for. It's particularly a bad situation there, but I mean, it does happen all the time. You know, this is happening everywhere, like Biafra was last year.
Mr. Harrison, with all of the enormous problems in the world, how did you happen to choose this one to do something about?
Because I was asked by a friend if I'd help, you know, that's all.
3 years later, he even mustered up the courage to again perform publicly with his 1974 George Harrison and Friends North American tour, which turned out to be something of a critical disappointment. Harrison never really liked being on the road, as it kept him away from his family and continually exposed him to obsessive fans, as well as the well-known rock star temptations from which his orthodox spiritual life demanded he abstain. The decade which had begun with so much promise soon took a terrible turn for the idealistic artist. By the mid-70s, Harrison was beset by a series of misfortunes, most notably the end of his 10-year marriage to Pattie Boyd, who took up with his best mate Eric Clapton. In addition, poor sales of his albums Living in the Material World, Dark Horse, and 1975's Extra Texture added to his growing despair. Worse, Harrison found himself caught up in a lengthy plagiarism suit. Bright Tunes Music charged that the composer's brilliant My Sweet Lord was lifted from the 1963 Chiffons classic He's So Fine. A significant health scare occurred in early 1976 when George was diagnosed with liver damage due to serum hepatitis. The frightened musician turned to famed California acupuncturist to the stars Dr. Zion Yu, and following a course of treatment, found his health temporarily restored. Fortunately, there were now definite signals that Harrison was emerging from beneath his dark cloud. First came the November 1976 release of the critically acclaimed, though only moderately successful album, 33 1/3. His personal life, too, was perking up, as George was seen escorting new love, Mexican-born Olivia Trinidad Arias, a quiet record company receptionist he'd met 2 years earlier. On August 1st, 1978, the happy couple celebrated the birth of their only child, son Donnie, and married on September 2nd of that same year. While Harrison was determined to instill a deep love of music in his young son, he was careful not to push him too hard in any one direction. George comments.
He's got a pretty good ear for music. He enjoys all kinds of music, from Mozart to Ravi Shankar and to Little Richard and Chuck Berry. So he's good. He's playing the piano a little bit, and I think he's going to be okay. I'm not saying that that's what he's going to be in his life. I mean, he's obviously got a good musical ability. You can't turn the television on without it still having something to do with Beatles, you know. And all the kids, as I was just saying to somebody earlier, all the kids pick up on the Beatles through Yellow Submarine. See, I made a point of not saying anything about them. But by the time he was 5, you know, he wanted to know how the piano part to Bulldog went, which completely threw me, because I didn't understand where he'd heard a song like that, because I hadn't heard that myself, really. And I realized it was in Yellow Submarine.
The happy new husband and father also found time to pen his scattered autobiography, I Me Mine, which was first published in a deluxe limited edition in the summer of 1979. Following the murder of John Lennon in December of 1980, Harrison promised himself he would do what he could to provide emotional support for John's musician son, Julian Lennon. In a rare interview, George comments on the talented young man.
I haven't seen him over the last 2 years, but 2 years ago I spent a lot of time with him, and you know, I'll try to sort of give him a bit of help and direction. And he went through a couple of years of, which you probably read in the papers, going to clubs and, you know, being sucked in to situations that he should have avoided. But I think now, having done that, he's a much smarter, wiser person. I've seen him just on TV doing interviews and singing his song. I think he's got a great future as a musician and a songwriter. I think as a human, he's real charming. He's got the smartness of John, but he's got a softer edge.
Harrison's 1980s rebound kicked off with Somewhere in England, released in June of 1981, spawning the hit All Those Years Ago, Harrison's touching tribute to his slain friend, John Lennon. The so-called Me decade proved a time for spreading his wings. George indulged his love of motor racing and turned social activist, protesting, amongst other things, nuclear arms as well as the destruction of a venerated Henley movie house. A lifelong film buff, Harrison joined forces with longtime business partner Dennis O'Brien on August 1, 1980, to launch Handmade Films. The company turned out such successes as The Life of Brian, Time Bandits, and Mona Lisa, which garnered a Best Actor nomination for its star Bob Hoskins. For George Harrison, it seemed, the unreal world of the Beatles had prepared him well for the make-believe world of the movies. On November 30th, 1984, George Harrison and his age-old Apple mentor Derek Taylor attended a literary reception in Sydney, Australia, to mark the release of Taylor's limited edition leather-bound memoir, 50 Years Adrift, published by Genesis Publications. Next is the Spirited Press event, which took place following a private reception for patrons and various Aussie bigwigs.
Well, George, how easy was it working with Derek?
Very easy, very easy. That's why I've known him 20-odd years. It's very simple, really. We share many things in common and enjoy the same kind of jokes, so it's pretty easy.
Is it, in fact, the start of something new? There'll be more books coming between the two of you?
I don't really know. I'd like to see Derek writing now, as he's got this memorabilia and all his background out of the way. I'd like to see him write some sort of more comical books, you know, just funny, or maybe, I don't know, anything, you know, just to write, as opposed to writing about himself, just to write his observances, because he's a funny person and he's a good writer. I like the way he's able to use words, and as a songwriter, or trying to be a songwriter, I appreciate his knowledge of and the number of words he actually knows. For me, I only know about 10 words in the English language.
With that, sorry, George, with that book, is that really it? Is there anything more to be said about the Beatles?
No, that for me, I'll answer that if I may, Squire, okay. Because that's it for me. I think it should be. I wanted to do it and did it, and that should really be it. And, you know, it was nice to do it, but that we should draw the line there and get it and publish some fiction, some jokes. You know?
Yeah,
there's plenty to do. Plays and novels and God knows what else.
One reason I liked him writing it was, you know, there's been so many books, and no doubt there'll be many more, written by people who are so-called experts and who know it all, and 99% of them are lies, or, you know, just written from other sources, you know? Mm-hmm. And so it's good to have a book that's not only from an inside point of view, but also that isn't particularly nasty, because it's a tendency, people always want to be nasty, take a negative approach, and I think this book's more interesting, it's more revealing, and at the same time, it's, you know, it's not just going for stabbing you in the back, like a lot of people tend to go that approach because they think it means making more money. And so it's enjoyable in all different ways.
Talking of money, there's a story on one of the wires that I'm making $1 million out of this. It's a matter of public record that the book is whatever it is in any given country, and I, as a struggling author, get 10%, no more, for 3 years' work, less tax. It'll probably be about 1,400, what would that be?
About 10,000.
About 10,000, 12,000 pounds, that's 4,000 a year. Wife, wonderful wife, and 6 fabulous children. Draining me dry. I'll have about 10 bob left for Perrier water, and that's the kind of life. That's true. My wife made this beautiful jacket. We live like peasants in Suffolk, and it's all right. But that I wanted to mention that, not because I resent the story, but because I couldn't be making $1 million. What would these people be making? Never mind the Scottish monks who bound it. Put the guilt on the
George, does it mean, in fact, that being involved in this sort of book, that there's a diminishing interest in music? I mean, what's your attitude to music?
No, not really, because I was doing my role in a book like this is simple, because it's gone over a period of 3 years. So every so often I've just been presented with a bundle of typed papers which I'd read through with my red pen and either correct or eliminate little bits which I thought, you know, like I think everybody needs to have an objective point of view, because sometimes, you know, we all do it. You tend to get into something for your own personal reasons, and it's a bit of a wandering away from a reader's point of view. So it's been spread over 3 years, so it's not really been, if I had to have done it all in one session, say, it would have been a difficult task, but the way it's been done over that time span, it's been quite interesting and enjoyable, because there's no other reason apart from friends just to hang out, so this is a good reason to hang out and actually be productive at the same time.
Yeah.
Do you still have a close involvement with the movie industry?
With the movie business, yeah, at the moment. In fact, I'm negotiating to buy the rights of 50 Years Adrift to make it into a movie, with Robert De Niro playing Derek Taylor.
Who would play George Harrison?
Well, I'm not in the book, am I? Oh, well, he's just a minor part. We get one of the Ruttles or something like that.
George, you said earlier that you were working on another book.
That's true, yeah.
Tell us about that book.
Well, if you want to see later, they may even let the cameras take pictures of it. There's a showcase out there with... It's a funny story. Brian Roylance, the publisher from Genesis in England, he met an out-of-work New Zealand artist who was a botanical artist called Keith West. He met him in the museum in London and somehow got talking to him, and it resulted in him asking me if I was interested in doing yet another book. But this time, if you also see a little book out there called The Raising of the Murray Rose. And it's a little miniature book like this, so we had the idea of doing just song lyrics and some of the songs illustrated. And when I met this artist and saw his work, it's fantastic. Again, it's nice to have your work put into these little books, because it gives more life to it, I think. Plus, the idea of giving a job to an out-of-work artist, especially of his caliber, because the pictures he's done are amazing. He also gives him a chance, which he's very happy to be doing, of doing some art that is not strictly from what his job was, which is botanical. So you get these other pictures which, you know, he's now unleashing his imagination on my lyrics and coming up with some great things, and when it has flowers or trees or something, they're so lifelike. But you have to see them for yourself. So there's many reasons that go into a book like that. You know, it's just for your kids or for the future, you know, to have a little book. So here's my latest book, and it's all nicely bound with, you know, it's nice. So well, that's coming out sometime. We haven't set a date, but the art is busy working now.
George, apart from books, what about... Sorry, Derry.
No, not at all.
George, apart from books, what about music? Where is that in your life these days?
Well, I don't have to make records any longer, which is a relief, because I'm not really of the competitive nature. You know, I don't want to have to go out there promoting and doing all this stuff which is necessary now. I mean, let's face it, it's a sort of cutthroat business, and I'm not really into that, so I no longer have to make records. But having said that, I've found since I don't have a commitment to the music industry, I've been writing much more music than I've done in the past. I mean, for instance, the last couple of months I've written about 28 songs, and I make demos which are much better because they can be good quality demos, but you know, there's something good about demos because they don't, you know, when you get making a record, it gets serious, and you know.
Will you perform live again?
Well, but what do you think this is? It's still working here. Music, yeah. I don't know. I doubt it, although it's too much trouble, you know. It really is a lot of trouble. And I'm not sure if anybody wants to see me. Pardon?
Did you have reservations about coming this far away from home? Was the reason that...
No, not really. It's a funny thing to come and do. Come all the way to New Zealand for lunch.
How did you do it then?
Well, because of my involvement with Derek and the publisher, and also because New Zealand was just a place. I wanted an excuse to come back here.
Did you fear the book wouldn't sell if you didn't come to hype it?
Well, I don't know. I mean,
a terrible word.
That's. I didn't. It didn't cross my mind. But if you're asking me, do I think by me being here will help get a little publicity for it? I'd say yes. But I came primarily because these people are my friends too, and I thought it'd be good fun to, come for a few days and have a look around.
You said in the book yourself, if you hype something and advertise it fully, you'll get enough people to come and see it. So presumably that's...
Well, that's right, but if you read that in the context of what I'm saying, that's really why the music business and the same with the film business, the whole thing is like that, but you can't really put a limited edition book in the same category, although it's true because how many of you people would be here if Derek was on his own? I don't know. You can answer that.
The close of the 80s unveiled even more surprises for the artist seemingly just hitting his stride in his 40s. 1987's heralded Cloud 9, produced by ELO's Jeff Lynne, proved a delightfully upbeat work, anchored by the infectious #1 hit, Got My Mind Set on You. In February of 1988, George Harrison held court at the elegant Sutton Place Hotel in Toronto in celebration of the release of his so-called comeback endeavor, Cloud 9. What follows are a few choice cuts from the lively public exchange.
When you were getting ready to do Cloud 9, what did you set out not to do so that you would get away from that?
Yeah, well, I set out not to use drum computers and MIDI keyboards for a start, because I think most of the things these days are like that. With sequences, you hear so many records, it's just one guy pressing one note on a whole bunch of things that are all sequenced. So I wanted to get it more human, like the late 60s or early 70s, how I used to make records in the past, basically. And just have it a bit more real.
George, I had a dream last night that you and everybody on that record decided to go and do a tour. Are my dreams going to come true?
Possibly. I think Elton at the moment's doing an album and he's going to be promoting that because he said there was some story that Eric and him was going on tour, Eric Clapton. And Eric told me that he asked Elton, and Elton said, I haven't heard about that. So the managers sometimes just make up these ideas. He said I couldn't do anything till next year anyway. But I think that kind of show would be nice. It'd be nice for me because I don't fancy being like the star of some show. I wouldn't mind being a part of a show and doing some of my tunes, but I wouldn't like the responsibility being out there on my own.
When was the last time you did any sort of major tour?
1974.
Close time.
Yeah, I think it's creeping up. I think with the end of this year or early next year, if I'm going to do anything at all, I better do it pretty soon. Otherwise, I'll be, on crutches or something.
We are waiting.
Thanks a lot.
George, you talked in the past about the fact that you weren't that crazy about doing a video. And my mind set on you. I just love that video. I think it's so hilarious. And at first, I wondered how much of your own sense of humor was actually a part of that.
My humor is such that I have to just be able to have something funny happening around me and I can be deadpan because I'm not really interacting, but I think that way it works good. And basically it was the director, a guy called Gary Weiss, who incidentally directed The Ruttles. So he's a very funny fella himself, and it was, just through talking with him, trying to think of the idea, and he thought of just having a simple setting like that room and make the room move where I could just sing straight, play straight, and everything else would be the joke. And the other part of the question was...
Are you doing more videos or are you less?
Yeah, well now it's the sort of thing they expect you to do, they want you to do, and I didn't like the idea first, but it's okay. So far they've seemed to work out okay.
What gave you the idea to do When We Were Sad?
You mean the song or the video?
The song.
Well, basically, it was, I just suddenly thought it would be nice to write a song and record with the sounds of 67, 68, that period. It was just a whim, really. I just thought, well, that'd be nice, and especially because I was, at that time, with Jeff Lynne, I was in Australia. And I know how much he likes the old cellos and stuff. So So I started out to write it. I didn't have any lyrics at the time, so it wasn't really called When We Were Fab, but it was tentatively called Aussie Fab because it was reminiscent of the Fabs and written in Australia. So purely a nostalgia, trip down memory lane, really.
No deep message here?
No, not really.
I read where Just for Today came to being after you read a pamphlet on Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a kind of a different way of getting a song.
Yeah.
What triggers you to put pen to paper?
Well, really, if you're into the songwriting mood, then really anything can trigger it. Like, I had these 3 friends of mine who were all in AA at my house one night, and that's back in 1983. And this guy showed me the brochure, just a little paper thing that was called Just for Today. And it just seemed so nice, the nice idea to try to live through this day only. I mean, it's not just for alcoholism. I think it's good for everybody to remember, we can only live today. The only thing that really exists is now. Past is gone, and future we don't really know about. So it's like that extension of the be here now idea. And I thought it'd make a nice song, and so I wrote it. But it's good also for AA, I think. Maybe we could make it into a TV commercial.
George, at one time you considered calling your album Fab, and then you changed it to Cloud 9. Why did you pass on Fab, and why did you say Cloud 9?
Well, because Fab it's a little, if you know about the connotations of the past, of the 60s and the Fab Four and all those things and the pre-Fab Four, then it's a good little joke. But if you don't know about that, it sounds a bit pretentious. And also, when I looked at the photograph on the album sleeve of me with all these clouds, it looked more like Cloud 9.
Looking at the music industry now that you're in as a solo performer as opposed to a staff member, how different is it for you personally?
Well, it's totally different, really. In those days, it was the 4 of us. We just went in studios, made records, went out on tour, then went back in the studio, made records, and that was it, really. Nowadays, it's a big business, and it has to be coordinated with the Beatles after around 1964, at least. We just had to put records out and people rushed out to buy them. It's not sort of like that these days. You have to work with the record label and coordinate releases and do whatever promotion you can. And also, I'm on my own, really, whereas in the past I would have had 3 other smart asses all cracking jokes with me. I miss that side of having, we used to have fun at press conferences. They used to be really funny because, there'd always be somebody with a wisecrack. But, I miss that side of the Fab Four.
George, do you find that people treat you as some sort of religious icon these days?
No, not really. I think people seem to give me some respect, which is quite nice.
You have gray hair.
Yeah.
Do you have any reservations about making another album and getting back into the sort of sweepstakes of the music business?
No.
I think the last few years, the last couple of albums, you not have some reservations about that?
Yeah, I got a bit tired of it back in around about 1980. I just felt there was no point, really. From what I could see, the way the music was that was out there, I couldn't relate to it. And I just thought, well, I've got a lot of other things to do. I might as well have a rest. But getting back into it, I didn't really feel like, I didn't really consider what's going to happen. I'm going to be out there with this record and they may not buy it or whatever. I didn't think about that. I don't think, so if you have a flop, it's a flop. I think you have to just make something that you enjoy yourself and see what happens. And I've had enough success in my life that if I have failure, it's okay too.
George, you talked about not having 3 friends beside you and joke with and maybe be a bit more support.
Yeah.
What is more difficult, or what was more difficult, being a Beatle or an ex-Beatle?
I think being one was much more difficult. I mean, it was fun for a long time, but there was so much pressure on us, It became really tiresome, and it was good in a way to dissipate that energy that there was with the four of us together. You know, let it go away so that we could have some semblance of a life. Otherwise, it would have just been madness, you know, continually.
George, how much of an influence was Jeff Lynne as far as getting you to go and do this album? Was it mostly your idea, or did Jeff Lynne come to you and say, I've got a great idea for an album?
No, it's my idea to get him. I thought about the producers that I'm familiar with, which aren't many. I thought, you know, I need to have somebody who I would respect and who also had some respect for my past and wouldn't try and make me into something I wasn't. Then I thought of Jeff, and then it was a matter of getting to know him. And from then on, we worked really, most of the songs were mine, but we wrote 3 songs together on the album. And we just worked very well as a team, you know. He had a lot of ideas, which he bounced off of me, and vice versa. It was good, but during that, I just thought, some of the songs, especially some of the ones we wrote together, I kept saying, well, you should sing this bit, but then he'd say, no, it's your album, you have to do it. So I'd like in the future to work with Jeff to make an album which is not him or me, you know, it's us. That way, you know, I think it'll be more interesting.
Harrison then threw in his lot with a makeshift band of rock heavyweights, Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne. Calling themselves the Traveling Wilburys, this unlikely ragtag pop quintet scored a string of hits, including Handle with Care and End of the Line. Here Harrison straightens out a member of the media who thought that perhaps he was once a member of the Beatles.
You know, we went through such madness in the 60s with the Beatles that I overdosed on all that, you know? So although the Beatles, you know, maybe was a mirror for a lot of people, you know, you can't go on living in the past, but, you know, we're all thankful for the happiness they brought.
You say they?
Say the Beatles, yeah.
You don't say we?
No, you weren't in the Beatles, were you? Oh, yes, I remember you.
The 90s, ironically, found Harrison returning to his Beatles roots. Through the latest high-tech wizardry, the 3 surviving Beatles joined the late John Lennon on record to lay down John's Free as a Bird, which appeared on the wildly successful 1995 triple CD set, The Beatles Anthology. The ambitious project spawned an ABC television show, plus an exhaustive retrospective book of the same name, published in October of 2000. But Harrison's roller coaster life once more down-spiraled in an unfortunate string of events. On December 30th, 1999, the guitarist suffered a harrowing early morning attack in his bedroom at Friar Park when he was stabbed in the chest by an intruder with a long psychiatric history. The incident left the former Beatle hospitalized with a collapsed lung. Only days later, George learned that vandals had also broken into his Maui, Hawaii retreat. The beleaguered Beatle, it seemed, had nowhere safe to hang his hat. Ironically, just months prior to the attack, George spoke about the overall issue of security. In view of the vicious attack he endured in his own home at the hands of a knife-wielding madman, his faithful words are now almost difficult to hear.
I'm not really worried about being in public. I'm not crazy about being in crowds. This is even just walking in an airport or being in a football match or something. You know, this is when nothing to do with people looking for me or threatening me. I just don't like crowds. I don't like traffic jams. I don't like that situation. I prefer peace and quiet. But I don't really worry about anything like that. The only time is if you get a mob of people who know you're going to be somewhere and they're particular fanatics. There's always fanatics, you know, at rock and roll concerts, but to do a tour wouldn't be any trouble because you have all the security, you know, the way in and the way out. You know, it's no bother really. I don't fear for my life like some people try to suggest. You know, they said since John Lennon got killed, I go and hide and I've got a big fence around my property. I had the fence around my property back in 1965, you know.
Harrison then faced his greatest challenge with his ongoing, rapidly deteriorating health. Years of heavy smoking had contributed to a diagnosis of throat cancer in 1997, for which the star underwent 2 aggressive courses of radiation therapy at Britain's Royal Marsden Hospital. 4 years later, cancer struck again. this time forcing surgeons at Minnesota's famed Mayo Clinic to remove a growth on Harrison's lung in early May 2001. Just 2 months later, the grim news leaked out that George was being treated for a brain tumor at the Oncology Institute of Southern Switzerland. Ironically, cancer also took his mother's life years earlier in Liverpool. Yet in typical fashion, Harrison boldly soldiered on, issuing a statement that he was feeling fine and imploring fans not to worry. As both a Beatle and a solo artist, George Harrison's timeless legacy remains his pioneering contributions on the slide guitar, his flowing lead rhythms, and haunting, soul-searching compositions. Perhaps even more significantly, Harrison infused weighty Eastern ideals into his thought-provoking lyrics, popularizing the philosophy and inspiring countless listeners to embark on their own spiritual journey. Whereas poets like Bob Dylan helped define the problems of his generation, it was only Harrison who provided some concrete answers. As a solo artist, his impressive body of work follows the wholly positive ethic of the Beatles' mantra, "All you need is love." While Harrison has long been upstaged by the caustic wit and overpowering legend of John Lennon and the high-profile showmanship of Paul McCartney, history may yet regard the quiet Beatle as the dark horse who unexpectedly bolts to the fore. While Harrison at times may have been his own worst enemy, he was certainly held in high regard by others. No one, neither his ex-wife, Beatles colleagues, or business associates have ever really had a bad word to say about him. It speaks volumes about the man that he could lose his wife to his best friend and still manage to stay close to both. But perhaps the truest measure of this extraordinary man from working-class Liverpool remains his unwavering moral compass. When the media continuously sought to elevate the Fab Four to some otherworldly pedestal, the no-nonsense Harrison once told me, "All this stuff about the Beatles being able to save the world is rubbish. The thing about the Beatles is that they saved the world from boredom." George Harrison, the humble, self-proclaimed gardener. There's something in the way he continues to move us all. I'm Jeffrey Giuliano.
I got born seemingly to become Beatle George. All I'm doing, I'm acting out the part of Beatle George, and I mean, even if it's been a Beatle for the rest of my life, it's still only a temporary thing.
Jeffrey Giuliano is the author of some 30 internationally best-selling books on the Beatles, John Lennon, and other iconic musicians of the 1960s. In 2006, his book, Paint It Black, The Murder of Brian Jones, was made into a film by Stephen Woolley and Nick Powell entitled Stoned, The Wild and Wicked World of Brian Jones. It remains a cult classic and the only film bio of the Rolling Stones. Giuliano is also a veteran journalist, having written for dozens of high-profile newspapers and magazines, including The Sunday People, The Daily Mail, The News of the World, The Mail on Sunday, Playgirl, and Rolling Stone. A noted film actor, Giuliano starred in such movies as Vikingdom, Scorpion King 3, Jules Verne's The Mysterious Island, The Fifth Execution, Far Cry 3, Fire Desire, among many. In addition, he hosted the long-running North American syndicated radio series, Jeffrey Giuliano's Roots of Rock, for 5 years, as well as pioneering the audiobook industry in the 1990s by authoring, narrating, and producing over 250 original, non-book-based, interview-driven productions. Giuliano's publishers included Random House, HarperCollins, Delta Entertainment, Durkin Hayes, Playaway Audio, Speechworks, and B&B Audio, among dozens more internationally. In 1998, Random House acquired his firm Tribute Audio, for which Giuliano acted as CEO and publisher for 5 years. His best-selling audiobook, That Fateful Night, True Stories of Titanic Survivors in Their Own Words, was nominated for a Grammy. In 2014, Jeffrey Giuliano founded Icon Editions and G2 Media Arts to market his updated works as well as publish new projects. As a visual artist, Jeffrey has been showing in galleries across America since 1977, garnering impressive reviews. His first professional assignment was designing several T-shirts for The Who's Pete Townsend in 1976. Jeffrey also designed and illustrated many of his original rock biographies for the biggest publishers in the world from 1984 to 2006, as well as designing for his pioneering record label, Samba Records, in the mid-1990s. From 2006 to 2011, Jeffrey was also the primary designer for the French fashion house Cotai. When Giuliano first conceived of creating his own literary imprint, Icon Editions, he became responsible for illustrating and designing 35 book covers, several hundred CDs, DVDs, as well as dozens of promotional posters, and eventually an entire collection of exclusive fashion and art. The expansive Design by Giuliano brand grew out of Jeffrey's impressive commitment to the arts and is the culmination of a lifetime's work by an extraordinarily talented and determined Renaissance man.
Peach and Love Records. Thank you for listening.